So you're wondering, how do I increase my feminine energy? In this video, I'm going to share some practices and new ways of being so that you can experience more flow, more freedom, more joy, and more receptivity in your feminine energy. So I recently did a whole video on the distinction between feminine and masculine energy. So if you want to go watch that first, it's a really great video to give you an overview of this topic. Because right now what we're going to dive into is how to embody more of that feminine energy. And the reason we might want to embody more of that feminine energy is especially if we're feeling exhausted or overwhelmed or overworked. So I'll share with you a little bit about my story so you can understand how this has really transformed my life and what I did in order to allow that and enable that to happen. So possibly like you, from a very young age, I was a little overachiever. My parents are Cuban immigrants. They came from Cuba after the revolution and they lost everything. My dad's family lost everything. And so my dad had a very strong belief system that you had to work really hard in order to make money and create stability. And even if you worked really, really hard, it could all be gone in any moment. So you had to be ready to hustle and do hard work and get things done. He came from a very masculine, energetic inside of a culture and a society that was also very masculine and very focused on success and achievement. So from a very young age, I was a straight A student. I did everything that I was supposed to do, and I got my needs met. I survived, so to speak, by doing more, by hustling, by hard work, by getting straight A's, by getting into a good school, by getting a good job, by getting a promotion, by making money, and by getting the next promotion, getting an MBA. So I did all the things, and I spent my whole life in this hustle, hard work mode. And about 5 years ago, I crashed. It was completely unsustainable for my body to operate for as long as it did in that way. I never relaxed. I never calmed down. I was always on, always working. And even if I wasn't working, I was thinking about work or feeling guilty about not working. And so as an entrepreneur, this eventually led to not only a personal breakdown and a health breakdown, but also an emotional and a business breakdown. Because finally, when I finally did crash, my whole business crashed and burned with it. And so what I had to do in hindsight, I didn't realize this was what I was doing at the time, but I had to adopt a more feminine approach to business. I had to change my life and my business to have more of the feminine energetic. And the way I did that was by adopting feminine practices. I started working with mentors and leaders and people who really helped me to understand the value of the feminine, because I hadn't realized that I was kind of devaluing the feminine and valuing really only the masculine world of results and success and achievement. So the feminine is more of the receptivity piece. It's the flow piece. It's the quiet and the stillness. And it's really also a big part of it is reveling in the unknown. Now, reveling in the unknown was a really difficult thing for me to do because I had always operated in the world of creating outcomes, forcing outcomes really, right? I remember that one time I was in my MBA and I got an A minus. And I had gotten all A's up to that point. And so I went to the professor and I talked to him multiple times and convinced him to let me do extra work so that I could raise my A minus to an A, right? All because I really valued more that world of outcomes and results and accolades, certifications and grades more than I valued the world of understanding and introspection and just being in the situation and receiving the experience for whatever it was. It was very important to me to have that outward acknowledgement of my activity, if that makes sense. Some of the practices that I adopted that have really transformed my energy and the energy of my business and had incredible outcomes were practices of receptivity practices and stillness practices. So I'll give you some examples. These days, I do a morning ritual every day. And in that morning ritual, the first thing I do is I wake up and I just journal and I receive the downloads that have come to me through the night, through my dreams, through those thoughts that are happening right as you're on the verge of sleep and wakefulness. I just sit and I listen and I receive those messages. And those messages come from deep, deep within me. And for a long time, I ignored all those deep, deep within me messages. And those deep within me messages are that feminine intuition and that feminine awareness that I had been shutting out in favor of books and learning and workbooks and structure and all of that stuff. And so these practices of listening deeply to myself and also starting to listen deeply to others. So a new way of being with other people, a new way of connecting with other people, of deeply connecting heart to heart. Now, I'm not going to get into the heart wisdom here and now, but if you do some Google searching, and I'll post a video soon, we know now that the heart has wisdom. Science is showing us that the heart has wisdom. And in the world that's been masculine dominated, that heart wisdom has gotten sort of suppressed a little bit. These feminine practices are opening, which is another very feminine word and practice, opening to the mysteries, opening to the unknown, listening deeply to ourselves, listening deeply to each other. Another practice is the practice of surrender. When I talk about surrender, people can get the wrong idea because surrender sometimes gets associated, especially in a masculine paradigm, with giving up. And I don't mean surrender in the concept of giving up. I mean surrender in the concept of allowing and allowing life, receiving life. Think of it as the distinction between taking an inhale, right? Because inhale is the receptive, and receiving an inhale. Right? It's a slight distinction. It's very emblematic or descriptive of this more feminine way of approaching life and surrendering and allowing what is to happen. I'll give you kind of an analogy. I was kind of in this inquiry, in this dialogue with myself about what it is to open more to the feminine, and I had a dream. And in that dream, I was in a river and I was fighting the current and I was swimming and I was trying to get back to the bank of the river where I had left my things, but the river was carrying me down away from all my things, and I was fighting to try to get back. And all of a sudden in the dream, I remember hearing a voice that said, "Surrender." And so I just relaxed into the current and I started floating and I let the river take me down. I'm not going to share the whole dream, but essentially in the rest of that dream, I had a very beautiful experience because I allowed myself to flow with this river. And so if you think about life as a river, right, we can choose to fight against life and control all the outcomes and fight with the professor and get the A. And we could also choose to relax and surrender to whatever is already happening. And so I find that that's a really empowered way of approaching life, of surrendering and allowing what is, and at the same time having intentionality around what we want to create. Rather than fighting life, embracing it and accepting it and even appreciating it. And appreciation is another big time feminine practice. Appreciation is like the final stage of full receptivity. It's not just receiving the experience. It's not just allowing an experience. It's not even just accepting the experience, but it's fully appreciating the experience. And I found that this appreciation practice, which I also have a morning ritual practice around fostering appreciation, is one of the best ways to amplify our ability to manifest what we want in life. So that's a whole nother video, which I'll share soon. Just to remind you, how would life look if we started to surrender and allow and appreciate it rather than fighting the current all the time? So there are 4 practices that I want to share with you for specifically how to embody more feminine energy. The first practice is a practice of stillness, getting quiet and listening deeply to yourself. and also listening deeply to what's happening around you and what you can receive from the world around you. The second practice is of deep listening to other people and really connecting to people heart to heart and really listening from your heart. The third practice is self-care. And when I talk about self-care, I'm not talking about manis and petties and blowouts. I'm talking about deep, deep self-care that comes from really being with your true emotions. A lot of times, a lot of us, me included, try to avoid or ignore or power through negative emotions, right? I don't know about you, but as a kid, when I was crying, I remember my parents saying, "You put a smile on that face. We want to see you. We don't want to see you crying." And they were awesome parents. But this is pretty typical, right? Parents don't want to see their kids cry. But one of the best things you can do for your receptivity and for your feminine energy is to be with the emotions that you have and really feel into them and allow yourself to have them. And the final practice, and perhaps the most important one, is aligning with nature's rhythms. We live in a world where we are completely disconnected a lot of times from nature. And that's part of this masculine patriarchal dominance, right? Of overpowering nature, planting things and farming and changing the way the land is, right? And living in environments where we don't have to be connected to the seasons anymore. We've got air conditioning and we've got heaters and we've got indoor plumbing, all of which is awesome, don't get me wrong. But we're not necessarily very in touch with nature's rhythms anymore. And so one of the best practices that as women and men that we can do to foster more alignment with the feminine is to connect more deeply with Mother Nature, to take our shoes off and walk in the grass and feel the dirt underneath our feet, or feel the sand at the beach, to dive in the waters of the ocean, to come outside when it's a full moon and breathe in the full moon, and also come outside when it's a new moon and there's no moon, and pay attention to the feeling that's different. So aligning with nature's rhythms and the seasons especially is another way to really tap into that feminine nature and receptivity. So if you like this idea of feminine energy and you're curious about how to open up to more feminine energy inside of your business and aligning what you do with who you really are and how you want to be in this more flowy and flexible way, then go ahead and click on the link below and download my Monetize Your Magic playlist. I know you're going to love it. See you next time.